So Lucas, how have you been?
I've been doing good. I was having a hard time getting back into things after the holidays, but finally getting back into it.
Good.
What about yourself?
I've been doing good.
Good. I was at your business meeting yesterday. I heard a lot of what you had to say. It was good stuff.
Okay. Glad you were able to watch.
Yeah. Dude, what are you doing?
Wow, you got a lot of people popping in all of a sudden. I like it.
I worked with Polly Barber. And she said that she saw that you were my designated broker and you guys
Oh
talked.
yeah, yeah. It's so funny. She's funny because I owned an office, in Olympia Lacey for about 20 years actually, and she was hired by one of my agents to be his administrative assistant, and I thought, we'll see. And she was just so nice, and she was so smart, and just all this stuff. But the agent she was working for was always kind of, telling her she could never be a real estate agent and stuff, and she was fine as an admin person, could never be an agent. So she just gets her license and just blows the lid off of it. It's awesome to see.
That is pretty cool. Yeah, she was awesome to work with. Super nice.
Polly, yes, sir. She's great.
Yeah, it's a small world.
Yes, it is. And we are going to let Kylie in, and then we are going to start. It's 2 o'clock. Okay. Forms Mastery, the Forms Mastery series that I do on is focused on the main forms that we utilize in our transaction in transactions. And so the form we're going to be going over is Form 21. So if you don't have Form 21, you're going to want to pull that up from the MLS or whatever you got to do to have that to follow along. But Form 21 is the residential purchase and sale contract, and we also have Form Form 23, which is manufactured homes, Form 20, which is multifamily, Form 25, which is vacant land, and Form 28, which is condominiums. And they're all formatted the same. They all have the same basic legal wording and things. And so it would be kind of silly to go over each of them, but I am going to use the Form 21 since it's the most utilized of all those purchase and sale contracts. And then if you want to compare with some of the other forms, you're welcome to do so. I'm going to begin doing
How do I find the form, or where do I find the form?
you would have to, well, first of all, Goldie, she should have sent you something where you can pull that up. But if not, if you go to the Northwest MLS, if you have did you already get your Northwest MLS?
Yeah, I'm in the website.
Okay, so if you go to the top where it says very top of the site, it'll say forms library or forms something.
Yeah.
And just click that, and then it'll pull up all the forms, and you just scroll down to Form 21, and then click that, and it should pull up for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else have any difficulty getting that Form 21 or? Got it? Everyone got it? Okay, or getting it? Okay, and so that form is what we'll be utilizing to go over, but you'll want to compare with some of those others. I will be doing just something new this month and next month. And I'll be going over on Mondays just for an hour from 2 to 3. In fact, it probably won't even be a full hour on many of them, but I'm going to go over some of the specialty type transactions that we do that are not just residential, and how to avoid problems and what addenda to use. And so this next Monday, the 7th, I'll be doing the vacant land purchase and sale contract and transactions. That's Form 25 and the addenda that go with that. And then on the following Monday, the 14th, which is, I think that's Valentine's Day, isn't it? So we hit Groundhog Day today, and we got Valentine's Day coming up in 2 weeks. And then I'll be doing new construction and how to deal with their builders addendums and things like that. And then on the 21st, which is the week after that, I'll be going over the home contingency sale process. When a buyer wants to buy a house, but they have to sell their house first. So there's some things that are involved in that, including bump notices and response to bump notices, and so that can get a little complicated, and I want to just go over that. And these are all going to be recorded, so if you can't make it on those Mondays, they're all going to be in a video library that you'll be able to access, and Goldie can help direct you to get those when they're done. But the first one will be this coming Monday, and then in March I have some other ones that I'll be going over and doing, 3 of them. And I'll be trying to do 3 scenarios each month. But this right now, the focus here is on our purchase and sale contract Form 21. It, as I said, is the one I'm going to be using and going over with you, and then the Form 21 I'll be going over with you today, and also a week from today on Wednesday. So I do it in 2 parts. So today is Farms Mastery 1 Part 1, and next week will be Farms Mastery 1 Part 2, both going over this Form 21. Then on the 3rd week of the month, I do the financing addendum and the optional clauses addendum. And then and touching on the title contingency. And then on the 4th Wednesday of each month, I do the inspections contingency process and the Form 35 and 35R response. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of what the schedule is going to be. Any questions about the schedule and how that's going to go? They're scheduled from 2 to 4. Sometimes I get done a little sooner, and sometimes I scramble to hurry and finish up in time. But for these first two, they usually go right, pretty close to the full 2 hours. And if you have questions as we're going through, I want you to feel free to ask the questions, and make sure you have a complete understanding of what we're going over. What my goal is, and what my goal was when I wrote the course for this, which has been 12 years ago now. I've just had to change the forms as we've changed forms. But I wrote this course because it was by popular demand from experienced agents. So it wasn't ever intended to be necessarily a new agent class. It was intended to be a class for all agents, whether they're new or experienced, to have a mastery or a firm grasp of all of the concepts contained within this purchase and sale contract, what the implications of these different paragraphs are for your client, and just making sure that you're not inadvertently going to throw your client under the bus on something, and make sure that you feel confident enough to talk to people. I found that psychologically, we already know, all of us I think know, that real estate is a contact business. It's all about as many contacts as you can make, right? And referrals you can get, and that kind of thing. And so you're going to have a psychological barrier going on, keeping you from talking to people, going out and basically selling your service to people. If you don't believe yourself in your subconscious that you know it all, you've got to have a firm confidence that you know it all in terms of the contract, so that you feel like you can with that ease and grace and confidence talk to people and increase your business. And it's amazing when I watch agents how quickly their business can turn around when they have that confidence, that kind of swagger, I call it. And when agents have that swagger, it's like, look out. So anyway, so I hope to help each of you have more of that. Some of you already have it, right? But have more of that, so that you can increase your business and avoid issues that come along. In Washington State, we had a court precedent that was pretty powerful called Colton versus Heritage House. And in the Colton versus Heritage House case, the challenge was made through that case. This wasn't the purpose of the case, but the challenge was made through that case, that real estate agents are actually engaged in the practice of law, and we should be banned from filling out contracts. And so we had a state Supreme Court ruling on that. The state Supreme Court wrote an opinion saying that as long as real estate agents are licensed as brokers, as real estate brokers, and as long as real estate brokers are in an agency relationship representing at least one of the parties to the transaction, then you are allowed to practice law to the degree that you are just filling in blanks on forms that have been approved and prepared by lawyers. So our MLS form is one that has been approved and prepared by lawyers, and our job is to fill in those blanks. The caveat to it is that the Supreme Court opinion said that we will be held to the same degree of expertise that a lawyer would be held to in filling out the forms and handling the transaction. So it's kind of a big challenge for us to make sure we're doing that, because lawyers have many years of training, and they're usually very detailed in everything they do. And real estate agents, to be honest, many real estate agents are kind of wing it and see what happens kind of personalities, because you have to have that kind of personality to get out there all the time meeting new people. And so it's a challenge for some to really focus on those details, and others it's not a challenge because that's how you are, right? You're just a detailed person, but so everyone's a little different, but that's how it's going to, in that case of Colton versus Heritage House, that's how it's going to shake out, is you're going to be held to that same degree of expertise that a lawyer would be held to in doing their job. So as an example, because I get this quite often, I have an agent who says to me, I have a friend who came to me and says that they already have a buyer for their house, and they just want someone to write the deal up. And so I told him I would write it up for him. And so they're just going to pay me a fee, a couple $1,000 or whatever for writing the deal for him. Okay, so I'm not really going to represent anyone, right? Okay, that's wrong, incorrect. You have to represent at least one of them. So you must represent that seller friend of yours. You can represent both of them as a dual agent if you're able to represent them both equally in the transaction, but you must represent someone. Okay, well, but I'm just writing it up for a fee, right? No, you're not just writing it up for a fee, because that's what lawyers do, and you would have to have a lawyer license to just write it up. So you're not just writing it up, you must represent them and you must see the transaction through. You can limit the amount of work you're going to do and have some of that delegated back to that seller that they understand you're not going to do this for them, but otherwise you would handle it like any other transaction. So I throw that example out to you because I do get that come up quite often, and I'm surprised that so few people are even aware, of those boundaries that Colton versus Heritage House gave us, and not exercising them. So if we're just, going to be helping a friend, get this contract done, we need to make sure we're staying in those parameters of Colton versus Heritage House. Does that make sense to all of you? No questions? Okay, so with that in mind, then pull out the Form 21, or pull up the Form 21 on your computer, however you got it. I've got it printed out, so I'll be looking at my.
Hey, John, before we go further, when you said something about representing a friend and just, filling out the purchase and sale for them, how do you feel about, when we signed with Keller Williams, there was an expectation of that commission that we were going to receive. So, sorry, it might be off topic, but I'm just wondering how that fee works in that perspective, because they should be getting a commission off of that if it's a sale.
Yeah.
And there's a amount of liability both on your part and our part, and there should be compensation for that. So just writing it up and charging a fee seems kind of counterintuitive to me, because if you have to sometime down the road litigate this, there was no compensation that could properly compensate you for that hassle.
Right. So the fee would be 3%, for example.
Okay.
You know, that's what I mean. I don't mean a nominal fee, I mean a fee.
Okay.
And so you're absolutely right, Kelly. You want to understand. I just had one this morning. So the agent who called me, went over this with me this morning, said, she's the one who told me, she said, you know, I'm going to charge this seller, and it's an off-market transaction. And so she said, I'm going to charge 3%. The reason I'm going to charge 3% on my listing side is because I've been working with this individual for a year, and I've been giving this individual all kinds of helpful tips and advice on getting the house ready and all different kind of things. And I don't think I should discount it. And I said, don't. Know your value and be able to sell your value if you have to, because human nature is to always shop for the best price until they recognize value. And if you're not showing value, they might keep shopping on down the line for someone else, right? And so you've got to show value and why this is important to you. And I would say this, Kelly, that in this market we're in today, where you know, where you don't have to do much to sell the house. I mean, yes, we've got some great tools and we give it great exposure, but how hard is it to find a buyer when we've got the supply and demand inequity that we've got today? It doesn't take much, does it? So what we're getting paid for really isn't connecting a buyer to that house. What we're getting paid for is writing the transaction and seeing it through to close with our expertise and avoiding problems. And I just watched a videotape, videotapes. I said that like an old guy. I just watched I just watched a video of Annie Fitzsimmons, our legal assistance hotline lawyer, who was saying that that she one of the concerns she had was about lenders, and that and there's so many lenders who she's having agents complain to her about all these lenders who are incompetent and not doing their job, and blah, blah, blah. And her bottom line was, she says, you know what the whole issue really is? It's your fault, agents, brokers. It's your fault, because you should have, upon getting that letter of pre-approval from that buyer's lender, you should have done all the work to screen that lender, make sure that lender was going to be a good lender, and followed through on some of the issues that later could cause problems. You know, the down payment, where's that coming from? Did you get the 22EF, the evidence of funds? Did you get, you know, different things like that? And so yeah, there's a lot that goes into making a transaction go smooth. And it's just not a matter of just filling in blanks on a contract and hoping it. I mean, that's a part of it, is understanding what the effect of filling in certain things on certain blanks is going to have on your client. And that's what I hope to address, you know, as we go through these today and next week, next Wednesday. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
I do have sometimes a habit of just talking. I have a quiet, soft voice, and I have sometimes a habit of talking too quiet. So if you can't hear me or something, you know, just yell at me to speak up or something. But can you all hear me okay now as I talk to you? Okay. Okay. So okay, so let's look at Form 21. And so the first page of Form 21, and it's a 6-page document, and the first page is all the blanks. So there's no other blanks on the entire rest of the form, the other 5 pages, just on this first page. The other ones are all pre-printed and pre-done by lawyers, and we'll go over those and what those mean and how to deal with it when agents are trying to go outside of their bounds of Colton versus Heritage House, and they're trying to actually cross things out or add things into it and do different stuff to it, which is actually the unauthorized practice of law. But agents sometimes get a little carried away and do stuff like that, and how we should deal with that when that happens. And so when we get into those pre-printed paragraphs, I'll address some of those points that become problems. But right now, let's look at the first page. It has the blanks that you fill in. And the very first line, which are numbered on the left side, 1 through 16 here. We'll go over the first 8 today. And then next week, we'll go over 9 through 16. And I'll be going over both this week and next week, those pre-printed paragraphs that are already there and how those tie in with this first page, because most of them tie in with this first page. So on number 1, we have 3 items that need to be filled in. The first one on the far left is the date. And so the date is going to be the date that you write this contract. Okay, so don't dig into this too much. Okay, so your mind's going to be saying, well, wait, I'm going to have it all filled out today, but actually one of the spouses is coming in tomorrow morning first thing to sign, or I'm going to be sending it to him, and then the next day the other part is going to sign. Well, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter. This date is not the date of the contract. This is not the date of mutuality. The date of mutuality will be when the buyer and seller each sign down at the bottom and have reached mutual agreement. Okay, that's going to be our actual contract date. This will be referred to oftentimes as the date of the contract, but it's really not a date. It's more of a reference number that's going to be used to tie other addenda into this and other amendments into this. Also, there's going to be sometimes references made by escrows and things to the contract dated, and they'll be referring to that reference number, the date. But don't get too bogged down with it, because what really matters is going to be the dates of the signatures of the buyers, which will be the offer date, and then the seller upon signature that will make the contract and make mutuality. So the second item going across that's in the middle is the MLS number. So every listing is going to have an MLS number automatically assigned to it when that listing is submitted to the NERPlus MLS. And so that MLS number is going to be filled in there. And that's really important to make sure you got that number right, because if you're using autofill on your computer, one of the tools you have with your MLS, when you put that number down there, it's going to autofill several items on this contract, including the address of the property and some other things. And so you want to make sure you got the right MLS number in there. That's one of those measure twice, cut once type of things. You want to make sure you got that number in there right, because otherwise it's going to make for a long road back. And then sometimes you're going to be doing a transaction which is not listed for sale. It's an off-market, what we call an off-market sale, off-market transaction. And that's when the and that's what and I'll give you an example of that. So let's just say that you have a buyer, and the buyer is can't find anything in the MLS. You've looked with them for things in the MLS. They can't find anything in the neighborhood they want to be in. It's in their price range that meets the parameters they need to have. So you're a good agent, a good broker. So you roll up your sleeves one day and you go into that neighborhood and you start knocking on doors. And you say, hi, I'm John Hanson with Keller Williams Mountains to Sound Realty. I'm here to see if you're needing any, if you're interested in selling your house. And then you come across, hear a lot of no's, no. And then suddenly one says, yeah, as a matter of fact, yeah, my spouse and I, we were just talking about that last night. And come on in. And so, and you might laugh at that, but I'm telling you that when I started in real estate, that's all I did. I mean, it was just, that's what I had to do. I didn't know to do anything else. I just knocked doors in neighborhoods and asked people, and most people were very receptive, and there were those who were like, don't bug me, didn't you see the sign that says no trespassing, things like that, but you know, that's all right. I got several listings that way and sales that way, and I love it. So you do that, you find the house, now you say, I think I've got a buyer ready to go for your house, so let me bring them through, and you bring the buyer through, and the buyer loves it, and they want you to write the sale for them. Okay, so it hasn't been listed, and in fact, you're going to represent the buyer only in this transaction, let's say, right? So the seller is going to be unrepresented. Now, does that mean the seller is not being represented? Does that mean the seller is completely on their own? No. You have a set of duties through the license law that you owe toward all parties, whether you represent them or not. You have duties of honesty and good faith. You have duties of competently performing what you're doing. You have all these things, 7 of them, that you owe toward anybody. So that seller isn't just being left hung out there to dry by themselves. No, they've got you. They've got you with your duties toward third parties to be honest and fair and give them a market analysis that's not deceptive or anything else, right? And so then you would, write the contract for that buyer, but for that buyer, you would put in, for that contract, you would put in here N/A for not applicable. And where it says MLS number, because there's no MLS number, it's never been listed, it's an off-market sale, right? And FYI, if you were to represent the seller, let's say the seller liked you and said, yeah, I want you to represent me too. You represent the buyer and you represent me. Okay. So you would use in an off-market sale with the seller, you would use a Form 47. That's 47. Form 47 is the listing agreement for a listing that's not going to go into the MLS. It's just going to be off market. So you would create that agency relationship with the seller if you were going to be a dual agent, and then you would, automatically create an agency relationship with the buyer. But it would be good in a situation where you're going to be a dual agent to use Form 42, which is the agency disclosure form to disclose that you're a dual agent. There's only one blank on that one to fill in, and that's who are you going to represent in this transaction? Both, right? Both, dual agent. Or buyer only, if you're going to represent the buyer only. But it's always best to have all this stuff in writing, and it's just, a series of forms to become familiar with. So then you have the offer expiration date is your third and final item on that first line. And so for that offer expiration date, you are going to put in strategically a date that's not going to hurt your buyer client. What I mean by that is that if you put in, for example, if you put in 2 days, 2 days, now that means that the listing agent or seller has the rest of the day today, the full day tomorrow, which is day 1, and then the full day the next day up until 9:00 p.m. to respond to your offer. Basically giving them 2.5 days to play your offer up against other buyers to see if they can generate better offers. It's not unethical. It's actually thought of as being, good for a listing agent to do that, to utilize one offer to get a better offer on the other side of it. But that's according to the Realtor Code of Ethics. Now, I have my own code of ethics, and you might have yours, and I don't like doing that. That doesn't sound good to me. It doesn't feel good when that's done. So I don't do that, nor do I encourage any of you to do that, to play one offer you come in with against others and say, hey, I got this offer here for $785,000. If you can come up more than that, maybe we'll get yours accepted. Okay. And then when that comes in, you play that back to the other one. There's listing agents who will do that. And what I'm saying is, you don't want to leave your buyer unprotected in that way for a lengthy amount of time. You want to get an answer, and you want to get it reasonably quick, right? And you need to explain this to your buyer, because sometimes also, if you cut it too short, if I say, well, you have until it's 2:30 right now, you have until 3:30 to accept this offer, 3:30 today, you get 1 hour. Okay, that might upset a seller. They might think, it's a little bit pushy, right? And the listing agent might get a little irritated. So what I found works best is to give just 1 day. So if I was writing the offer right now, I would give until tomorrow, and maybe I would even put in there to 2:30 p.m. with tomorrow's date on it. Otherwise, it's going to default to 9 o'clock, because back on the second to last page, it actually addresses the timeline of offers, and it says that all offers expire at 9 o'clock p.m. on that given date. So so to avoid causing the situation or being a part of a situation that could jeopardize your buyer's offer, you want to limit that. But also for your buyer, you might think about some strategies you could use that would that might help, because in negotiations, one of the things that will motivate a seller to make a decision is to be given a deadline, a timeline. And if we're in a market like we are now, and they feel like, whatever, I'll just, if your offer's not here tomorrow, I'll have 10 more. I don't even care, right? Some sellers kind of take that flippant attitude, right? Which is dangerous, but some do, and some listing agents are that way. And you don't know who you're going to be dealing with. So you want to give them a deadline, a timeline. And so one strategy that I actually kind of like is to say, so let's say you're the listing agent, and I've got an offer all written up to present to you, to send over to you for your seller to authentisign. And I call you on the phone and I say, hey, I've got an offer on your listing, the one you just listed, and I'm going to send it right over. I just want you to know that on this offer, this buyer of mine who is eminently qualified to buy this property, and the pre-approval letter will be there, and they're paying 30% down, and they're just awesome buyers and ready to go. And I just want you to know that if this doesn't work on your offer, they're just going to move on to the next house right away. So what they've done is they have put in basically an offer expiration date, a timeline of tonight at 9 o'clock p.m. And if your seller accepts it, then we've got a deal. And I've written this offer for $30,000 over the asked price. So my buyers are willing to basically just give your seller an extra 30,000 bucks. And then the other agent, you're in his role play, you're the listing agent. The other agent, you, says, well, I put in the listing that we're not going to review offers until Friday. Okay, I saw that. That's great. So you can review other offers on Friday, but right now this offer will be gone as of 9 o'clock, as of 9:01 tonight, it'll be gone. So if your seller would like $30,000 for nothing, you might want to show it to him. For two reasons. And this is how I would speak to you. For two reasons. One is to comply with the license law, which requires you to present all offers in a timely manner. And the other reason is that you would be creating a $30,000 liability for your client. Your client would be losing out, and they could sue you for that loss of money if you didn't present the offer to them. So I would just encourage you, to present that, because I think it would be in their best interest to at least know it's there, right? And to comply with the license law and such. So that way I am pushing, I'm being pushy. I'm pushing for a quick response because I've got a buyer who doesn't want to mess around. They're willing to pay more, but they will only pay more if the seller makes a decision now. Well, maybe Friday we'll get 5 other offers for more money. Yeah, maybe you'll get none. Maybe you'll get one other offer and it'll be for full price, but ours is 30,000 over. So again, if your seller would like to have a free $30,000, you can sign this today, okay? So as the listing agent, you might say to me, well, wouldn't I be violating MLS rules by putting in the listing that we're not going to review offers till Friday, but we accept one today? No, a seller can do whatever they want. So the seller can have the intent to review offers on Friday, but if a better one comes up, they can take it anytime.
With a type of offer like that, do you usually still are you usually still contingent on appraisal?
Well, yeah, I mean, every offer is going to be different. One of those, if it's going to have financing in it, which is Form 22A, which I'll be going over in 2 weeks, in this, and I'll be spending an hour and a half on it, including the appraisal portion of it. Then it would have to be appraised and meet the appraisal. Yeah.
Okay.
So if we're talking about going $30,000 over the list price, and your concern is what if it doesn't appraise? Well, then we would probably, just to jump ahead 2 weeks, we would probably add in the Form 22AD, which is the additional down payment form, saying that my buyer will pay that extra $30,000 in cash if it doesn't appraise.
Got it.
This has been an insane market.
Yeah.
So just a little over 10 years ago, I started with this company right here. And when I started, we had the opposite problem that we have today. We had supply and demand that was the other way. So we had a ton of owners trying to sell their property and very few buyers. And so in just that 10 years, and it started 3 years ago, so in 7 years, the total switch over to the opposite, to having this crazy market, is just kind of shocking sometimes, but I guess because I've been in real estate for 36 years now, that I've seen it go in these cycles a few times, and I know how quickly it can turn and change, and you've just got to be ready to respond to the changes that come along, right? Because they are inevitable. Any questions about that offer expiration date or? Line number 2 is for the buyer's name or names, plural, and the marital status. It says status here, but it's talking about marital status. And then in the drop down, as you use the autofill in the on your MLS site, it's not called auto. Is it called autofill, John? Anyone? It's called autofill. I think it's called autofill. Anyway.
I think so.
It's going to have some drop downs, and so it's going to give you some choices, and it has to do with marital status. So, so the state of Washington is one of 9 states in the U.S. that are community property states, where it's important to know whether these 2 people are married or not. So you would, click the box that's appropriate for that situation. And when you're identifying the buyers, one of the things that you're going to want to do, because you're representing the buyer, is you're going to want to always get for them a packet of basic information about the property. And different title companies have different names for these. Some call it a Head Start packet, some call it a listing packet, some call it a trio. So it just kind of depends on the title company, what their name for it is, but it's just a basic, little packet of information that shows the tax rolls, shows what the taxes are on it and how they've been paid and things like that. And it shows the assessment, the assessed value and things like that. So the assessed value is the real value of the property, right? Anyone? No, it's not. So the assessed value is just a number they come up with for purposes of taxing the property. And sometimes it's really right on, and sometimes it's way off, and sometimes it's just a little bit off. But you should never rely on the assessed value as being the real value. As much as they might say it's being taxed at its real value, well, they're not real scientific in their appraisals when they do that. So I would never rely on that assessed value, but you'll get that information in that packet. You'll also get a legal description, which will be important to have because you've got to put that in with the transaction, that legal description, and then you will put that so you want to make sure you have that information, and you want to be able to look at it to see the last recorded deed. The last recorded deed means when the seller now of the property that you're trying to buy, when the owner of it right now, when they were first buying the property, say 7 years ago, this is the deed that transferred the title to them. So you look at that last recorded deed and make sure that the name of the buyers, which is now the sellers, are the same, right? Because if there was a change, there might have been a quitclaim deed, there might have been a foreclosure and a deed with that, there might have been something that went on, and you want to make sure that you have that information to handle this properly. Sometimes, and I say this because I see it happen so often, one spouse is selling the property, but you look at the last recorded deed and it shows 2 spouses who bought it together 7 years ago, and now they're selling it, but just one person is on there selling it on the listing. That's going to be a problem, right? It's going to have to get corrected somehow. Maybe it's been corrected and you just don't know about it. You're not privy to it, but you want to ask the other agent about that so that you can make sure that if there was a quitclaim deed needed, if there was a, you know, to go from one spouse to another, if there was something that needed to be in there, that it gets done appropriately before we get ourselves too deep into this transaction that where it may not happen, because maybe there's another spouse who didn't even know that the spouse was selling a property. And that spouse will have basically veto power all the way through. They can't close without his or her signature. And so you want to make sure that, you know, that everything is going to go smoothly. And it's just one of those additional things that we can be watching for to protect our client and make sure that they're not just going to get, you know, in a hamster wheel going nowhere, because when it comes time to record, they can't record because the other spouse has never signed. Yes, they live in Germany now. I'm telling you a real situation that happened to me when I first started out in real estate. Yes, the other spouse is living in Germany now. Yes, she's deaf now, so you can't call her and tell her about the offer. It was a real problem the day before closing to find this out. But I represented the buyer, and I didn't know, no one taught me. I didn't have a guy named John Hanson sitting here on a Zoom meeting talking about this thing to me. So I just had to try to dig out of the hole as best I could. And my clients, when the whole thing was said and done, we got it done. I felt like a hero that we got it done, but my clients were never happy, and rightfully so. This was something I should have done in advance. It's something I should have checked on. I should have looked at that last recorded deed, but no one told me, and saw the names, plural, of those people, and then saw the listing and seeing one name and say, "Yeah, that's a little odd," and question that listing agent about it. So, my demonstration there was to let you know there's a lot of room for error. There's a lot of listing agents who've been doing it a long time and doing it wrong for a long time. In this transaction I was doing, the listing agent had been in the business for about 15 years and was one of the top, if not the top producers in the county I was in. And he was as surprised as I was when the escrow company said we can't close it because of this situation. Right. So is there a difference between realtors? Yes, there's a huge difference between realtors. And it doesn't have to do necessarily with the experience, because there's a lot of people that have been doing the same thing wrong for a lot of years. Right. So it's just good to get in good habits now. And these are just things that take care of problems that could come up down the line. Any questions about the buyer's name or that packet, the trio, the Head Start packet, whatever you want to call it, from the title company? Okay. And it probably would be a good practice to give them a copy of that packet, and you keep one for yourself, and have them put their initials on the top of your copy so that you can show that you know, delivered them a copy of it. The third item on here is the seller's names. And again, from that last recorded deed, you want to check that last recorded deed against the name that's on the listing and make sure that everybody's there, everything's cool. You don't need to put in the status of the seller. Just put the names of the sellers on there, because they're not taking title, so doesn't matter. They're already entitled. And so those are the name issues as we come into it, right? And so the next item is number 4 here, which is for the legal description. which is attached as Exhibit A, that means that that the contract says legal description attached as Exhibit A. What if there's nothing in here that says Exhibit A on it? Is the contract complete? No. The contract makes reference to something and it doesn't exist here in the contract, it's not a complete contract. So there must be an Exhibit A, which shows the legal description. And so that legal description, many of the title companies include that legal description, and they actually say Exhibit A on the top of it. Isn't that great? And it's all ready to go. And then the buyer and the seller each put their initials and date it when they initialed. And then we have a mutual agreement as to what the legal description is to be. What would happen if there was no legal description? Well, in the year 2000, we had a situation in Seattle where a buyer and a seller were under contract. And while they were under contract and the buyer was doing their inspections and getting their financing ready and everything else, the seller was approached by another buyer. This new buyer said, I'll give you more money than that other buyer is going to give you. I'll give you $50,000 more. The seller said, really? Wow. All right, I'll take it. And so they did. And the first buyer finds out about it and sues. Because of course, they've got a contract. They've got the rights to purchase the property. And it went to court. And the court refused to make a decision and enforce the contract because the legal description was not complete. There was a common address, street address. There was, I think, even a tax parcel number, but there was not a complete legal description. So the court threw it out, said, I won't enforce that contract. And the seller was free to sell it to the new buyer for more money. So we want to make sure always, and this was a lesson, we all learned from that court decision. And I, at the time, had owned 3 offices, and I was running around between my 3 offices trying to make sure that all the agents' contracts had the legal descriptions on them, initialed and dated by both buyer and seller. And it's just something that should always be there. It's an automatic. Our Northwest MLS will fine the listing agent. I think every 3 days they get a fine when the legal description is not attached. Maybe it's every day. I don't know, but it's, it adds up. And those fines do. And you can't always count on a listing agent to do their job. So sometimes you got to do it for them. So if you didn't see a listing, you didn't see a legal description in the listing documents, then from that Head Start packet or that Trio packet that you got, you'll have that legal description there. And if it doesn't say Exhibit A at the top of it, you can just write Exhibit A at the top of it. And then have your buyer initial it and date their initials. And then that goes back with your offer. The seller just has to initial and date it also, and we're good to go. You did the job for the listing agent. You get no more money for it, but you see, you're doing what's got to get done to make this go smoothly for your client, right? Any questions about that legal description?
Sorry, John, I did have a question up with the buyer name.
Okay.
If you are adding another person, like you might be, somebody else might be purchasing this property, but they haven't been named.
Well, yeah, if you want to add someone, you use Form 22Z.
22Z, okay.
And then all parties sign the 22Z, and then all the documents are incorporated in for the new buyer who's been added on.
I'm just wondering how people are getting away with putting a house under contract and then selling it at the same time to someone else.
Oh, how that happened back in 2000?
No, I'm just saying how that happens nowadays with iBuyers. They put things under contract and then they find another buyer to buy it for more.
Isn't it the and/or signs?
Okay.
Buyer name and/or signs.
Yeah, maybe I was misunderstanding you, Kelly, is that I thought that you were saying that a different buyer was going to be added on to the names of the current buyers along with them.
No, it's assigning it to a different buyer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that'd be by assignment. Now, we're going to see next week that we have a paragraph that does not allow for assignments without the seller's permission. But if the offer was made, as it says in this paragraph, with the buyer's name, and then after it says and/or assigns, then that buyer can assign it to anyone they want, anytime they want, without permission from the seller.
Okay.
So that's one way it could happen.
I have a question also actually about the buyer. So if you have, now often people buy property in trust and they may have an LLC and so on and so forth. What is the due diligence I need to do to make sure that that is a valid LLC or that the trust is purely existing and is in good standing and all that? How would you recommend you do that diligence?
Well, you're saying for you as a buyer's agent?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, you should, I would say this, if you're my buyer, Crystal, I would say this to you. I would say, well, as your real estate agent, Crystal, one of the things I have to do is I have to make sure that I keep a good, clean file on every transaction, both for myself and for my office. And one of the things that we always have to have in that file is a copy of the creation of the buying entity. So I need to have a copy of the LLC agreement or the authorization agreement anyway for the LLC that allows you to sign for the LLC. And then when I go to present the offer, you see the listing agent may have that same question. And boy, does it ever look good, you know, when I can say, oh yeah. So here's the offer. The buyer is Super Bowl LLC, and Super Bowl LLC's documents are right here to show that this signer was the authorized signer for them.
So you will take the papers that they give you. You won't go to any other entity or anything to validate that as well.
No, I would go with the papers I have. Yeah. The expectation of us is that we take reasonable steps, and it would go beyond reasonable to have to go to the Secretary of State's office, check their records and things. You know, I mean, if you have those doubts, you can always check them. Otherwise, you would just go with their documents they produce.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right, thank you.
So I was going to say something when I made it the name Super Bowl LLC. I was going to say something for who's going to the Super Bowl. I couldn't even remember who was going. Cincinnati against
Rams.
Oh, against the Rams. That's right, LA Rams. So
I've also found that title escrow, they're really good about asking for those documents as well as they go through that process when there's an LLC involved.
Yeah.
And then going back to the legal description, I've had an example just this last week where somebody attached the wrong Exhibit A to a document. So just something to keep in mind that we caught. So
good job, because yeah, that happens sometimes. And so yeah, good job. We want to make sure we have that correct legal description done. And if we don't order that packet, that trio packet, and get it, regardless of what the listing agent produces, we can't compare it, and we just don't know. So it's always good to do your own due diligence and double check things. Oh, that's right. And the Detroit Lions didn't get in. We know that, huh? Or the Seahawks. Or the Kansas City Chiefs. Oh, well. There will be other years, right? Great questions, thank you. So then you put in the tax parcel number or numbers, because sometimes a house was built over 2 different parcels, right? Or 3 different, or 4 different. But whatever, you're gonna get that also on that packet, that pre-listing packet, or that Head Start packet, that trio, whatever the title company calls it. You're gonna get that information. You would make sure you have all of the tax parcel numbers in there. And then write the address, the common street address of the property out on that next line. Number 5 is for the appliances, personal property that is going to be part of the sale, going to be included as part of the sale. And so both paragraph 5 and paragraph C of page 2, if you go to paragraph C of page 2, all those things in paragraph C are automatically
No,
included,
no.
are automatically included in the sale, and then whatever's checked would also be included. What I'd like you to do for the next 3 minutes while I run to the bathroom, yes, sometimes teachers gotta go too, right? And so what I'd like you to do is just look over that, if you don't have to go, you know, you look over that paragraph C, look over those items that are on paragraph C, and look at the ones that are on paragraph 5 that you would be checking. And then I'll continue as soon as I get back. So you don't need to do anything. I'll just leave my stuff all set up, and I'll just run. I'll run back right back. See you in just a couple of minutes.
Oh, does it have his, like, does it count his payment? Let's see what violations there is. It wasn't.
All right, so everybody back? Thank you. Okay, so so on number 5, you know, you've got some freestanding stuff that could possibly be included, a refrigerator. The stove range might be built in, it might be considered freestanding, we don't know. So it's just good to check it and make sure. Washer, dryer, freestanding. So if your buyer wants the washer and dryer, they want to check that, right? Dishwasher, hot tub, fireplace insert, you know, all these things are things that, microwave is a common one. Could be other. And then on paragraph C, there's just a lot of stuff. The biggest mistake I see made on this is on paragraph C, one of the very first items mentioned on lines 40 and 41 are window coverings, curtains, drapes, window coverings. And for whatever reason, there's been just a lot of really good agents who just assumed that the curtains were personal property that the seller could take with them. And paragraph C says differently. It says they are considered real property. Goes through the description there and basically says, you know, if it's covering the window in some way, that's going to stay. And so if there is something that the seller is going to take with them, like maybe their bedroom drapes that match their bedspread, okay, then you would want to put that in the listing as reserved property that the seller is going to take with them, right? And then certainly in the contract, because just because it's in the listing doesn't mean much, right? It's just that's an important point to bring up. The listing is just simply an offer to negotiate. It doesn't mean this is how it's going to be. So just because you put in there that the seller was going to be taking the refrigerator with them, doesn't mean that as a buyer's agent, you can't write in or check the box for the refrigerator to go with the property. Certainly can. That's negotiable. If the seller wants to cross that out and say, no, the refrigerator is going to go with us, then let them do it. But if your buyer wants you to check the box, check the box. Same with the drapes. So each party agent, the listing agent and the buyer's agent, is trying to protect their client and make sure that it's done the way the client would want it done. And so the listing agreement is just, as I said, it's just an offer to negotiate. It's not a contractual anything for your buyer. It's a contract actually it's a contract between the owner and the listing brokerage. Has nothing to do with the buyer, right? But that's a fairly common dispute.
John, I have a question. Sorry, and I keep turning my camera off because my baby keeps popping in the camera.
Okay.
But I have a quick question about the item. So say a seller was like, they want to leave all of their items in their house. Like matter of fact, it's like the seller that I spoke with you about earlier today with the duplex, the attached duplex. So she's like, I want to leave all of my stuff in the house. I don't want to take anything. I'll leave all the furniture. Like, so say they don't, are they allowed to do that? And would it be like the buyer's responsibility to deal with the furniture, or would they have to take the furniture and all of their belongings out?
Well, it would need to be written in probably on a Form 34, which is the blank addendum we use, that would specify in the purchase and sale contract, it would specify on there that the seller will be leaving all furniture and personal property with the sale of part of the sale of the home. And And if the buyer's agent said, no, I want it out of there, that's got to be in their offer. You see,
Okay, I see.
that would have to be something negotiated, but in the purchase and sale, we'd want a Form 34 specifying what's going to happen with that personal property, furniture, whatever it is. And maybe even be, specific in some areas
Mhm.
of that. The
Then the
problem,
buyer say, oh, absolutely not. I don't want this stuff. You need to get it out.
well, then the seller says, then don't buy the house.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I think it's just because she's an older lady and she doesn't have any help with movers or anything, I guess. She doesn't know what to do with the stuff, so maybe that, okay.
Right, so as we talked about, there's a likelihood there that it's going to be an investor, right, that's going to be buying.
Yeah,
So that investor is probably used to hauling away old furniture.
gotcha. Okay.
So just leave it on them. But what your seller would be concerned about is what if the Department of Revenue for the state says there was value in that furniture of $50,000 and we want 10% of $50,000. For
That
tax.
happens?
That happens, yeah.
Wow.
Usually it's not over furniture, but sometimes it is, if it's a house full of antique furniture, if it's a,
Yeah.
I
She actually looks like she has some antiques in her house too, like really nice, like picture and decor and stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's interesting to know that.
yeah, there was a situation a couple of years ago where a seller included in the sale a boat, because it was a waterfront property. They were including a boat that was a $60,000 boat. They were just trying to include that as just a part of the sale. And the Department of Revenue actually came after them on that one and said, no, you got to pay tax on that boat value of $60,000. So you always want to just, make sure you tell the client what possible ramifications.
Hold on.
So I'm thinking that if the value of that furniture is probably nothing to write home about,
Yeah,
okay, then probably nothing to worry about.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, but on your own, time, it's good that you would go over those things in item C to be aware of what's expected to remain on the property. Because both on the listing side, whether you're on the listing side or whether you're on the buyer side, you're going to want to, be familiar with those and make sure that that the client's expectations are met. Item number, in C, on paragraph C, I forgot to mention that it says at the beginning of the paragraph, it says any of the following items, including items identified in specific term number 5, if the corresponding box is checked. And then it says located in or on the property. Okay, so in other words, if there was no hot tub on the property, but you check the box hot tub in paragraph 5, seller doesn't have to go buy a new hot tub and bring it in for the buyer. No, that's just for items that are already on the property. And then the last sentence of that paragraph C says that unless otherwise agreed, if any of the above items are leased or encumbered, seller shall acquire clear title before closing. So if there's something leased, on the property, a hot water heater, a propane tank out in the yard, a satellite system, a security system. If there's something leased that the seller's been leasing, they were probably assuming the buyer was going to come in and assume the lease, take over the lease. But the contract doesn't say that. Contract says the seller is going to pay it off so that the buyer will own it outright. So that's one of those issues we've got to be careful about if we're the listing agent. If we're the listing agent, we have to be careful because the seller is going to have to pay off that leased equipment if we don't identify that it's leased equipment. In 2 weeks, we'll be looking also, besides that financing addendum, we'll be looking at the optional clauses addendum, the 22D, which identifies any leased equipment in paragraph 7 of that Form 22D. Paragraph 7 is where you would identify the leased equipment, and a good listing agent is going to make sure they talk with their owner about anything that's leased and have that identified in paragraph 7 so that the buyer would take over that lease. Otherwise, the seller's got to pay it off for the buyer's ownership.
Hey, John, had a quick question on alarm systems. I know some of those are not owned, but leased or have agreements. At least 2 of them that I went in and showed had alarm systems. How do you, I guess you just have to ask the agent if they're owned or leased.
Yeah, because some of it will be, some of the equipment will be owned, right? And some of it might be leased, and depending on what it is, and that's the only way you'll know is to find out from the listing agent if it's owned or leased or what the situation is, and address it in the Form 34 so that it, well, paragraph 7 also, but also in Form 34 to clarify, you know, if maybe it's equipment the seller is going to pay off, but they have a contract that they've signed with the company and the buyer has to assume that contract, maybe, you know. So we would want to make sure whatever it is that it's addressed, there's clarity for buyer and seller, because the problem is when we don't address it. And then a month or 2 months after closing, your client, of course, is upset and angry at you because it was never addressed. And understandably. If you ever want to see people get really upset, does anyone else in here watch IDTV? Murder mysteries and stuff like that. Real life murder mysteries and stuff like that. I love them, right? So this morning, I haven't watched it for a while. I haven't watched anything, but I turned it on and they have this little segment called Love Thy Neighbor. And it's all about feuds between neighbors where it ended up in murder. And man, it just amazes me how childish adults can be. Just amazes me. And so we're dealing with emotions, you know, in these things. We're dealing with emotions, and we've got to deal with the repercussions of those emotions. And sometimes it's not fair that they're going to blame you, but they're going to blame you when something goes wrong or it becomes stressful because they wanted you to represent them so that these things wouldn't happen, right? So we try to have foresight into what things could happen to make sure they're addressed, you know, at the beginning as early as possible, so it doesn't come down to a crisis at closing or after closing. And this leased equipment is certainly one of those things that could happen. Okay, so then we come down to number 6, which is the purchase price. So the purchase price is one of those items that when you're doing the contract and you ask the client, what do you want to offer for the purchase price? And they're going to say to you almost every time, they're going to say, well, you're representing me. What do you think I should offer? They're putting you in a no-win situation when they do that. So you're not the decision maker, and you can remind them of that. I just want to remind you that I'm not the decision maker. I am your advisor. So what I've done is I have done up a CMA, comparative market analysis, for you to look at other properties like this one, what they've sold for, and what's going on in the market today, and what's on the market to compete. And this is to help you make a decision as to what you want to offer. You know, if you think it's a fair offer in a market like we have today, where, you know, where sellers are getting multiple offers on every property they list, you know, to think that you're going to be able to offer low and negotiate somewhat, it probably ain't gonna happen, right? If it's been priced correctly. And according to this CMA that I did, it looks like it's been priced pretty well. And talking to the listing agent, they've already got 3 offers in hand and expect 2 more by the end of the day. So how would you like me to proceed with the price? Right? So to empathize a little bit with the buyers, you know, the buyers, they have well-meaning relatives. Many of those well-meaning relatives are older, and they say, oh yeah, you always negotiate, you always offer low, so we'll come down and meet in the middle. Yeah, not in a market like today, it doesn't happen. You're just gonna lose out on the property, and then you have to go move on to the next one. Okay, so, but they're ultimately gonna have to make that decision as far as that price goes. So then you write in, or you type in whatever that purchase price. So that line 6 is tied in with paragraph A of the next page, of page 2. And on paragraph A of page 2, it says as a heading, purchase price. And basically, to sum up this paragraph, it's saying that the buyer represents that they have that amount for the purchase price. They have that amount of money in cash ready to go and close unless they've indicated otherwise. So many times the buyers are indicating otherwise by including Form 22A in the contract, which is the financing addendum. That makes it clear to everybody that the buyer's got to get financing of X amount of dollars. But sometimes we have situations where Uncle Phil is giving them $40,000, or, you know, some situation like that, or they have some sort of a trust fund that they're going to draw out of, but they don't have the cash on it. Well, these things have to be disclosed. And so you can put those into a form 34, which is the blank addendum form, or you can put it at the end of the Form 22D, which we'll be going over in 2 weeks, which is the optional clauses addendum. And it's just a space that is blank that allows you to write in some extra terms, usually meant for disclosures. So that's where you would disclose that the buyer is dependent on receiving a $40,000 gift from Uncle Phil. Uncle Phil's a nice guy. So that's, you know, that's just something to make sure you're aware of, that not only does it mean that, but we've actually had 2 situations happen in the last couple of years where we represented the buyer, and the buyer got approved, pre-approval for a loan, but that pre-approval was based on them being able to rent out their existing house for a certain amount of money. And when they couldn't do it, they thought they would get their earnest money back because they had a pre-approval letter that said in the pre-approval letter that they had to lease out their house. But the arbitrator in both of these situations ruled against the buyer and said, no, because of paragraph A, you would have had to have disclosed that separately, as a separate condition of coming up with that money. So, so be aware, if the buyer has circumstances like that, you're going to want to make sure that's in written disclosure on that Form 22D other paragraph, where you can write that disclosure in there.
So John, on that, having that relationship with that lender is probably going to be crucial at that point, because, if they're getting pre-approved, you don't know all the cash that they necessarily are bringing in as their monthly DTI or whatever. So, I mean, I don't know where that would show up. You just have to read their pre-approval letter, and if it didn't come up on there, then you would have no idea
Right.
that they were relying on investment dollars.
Correct. So they need to be put into the document somewhere.
Okay. So having a good conversation with your client before saying, okay, this pre-approval is based on your income and what other things might apply to this income.
Sure, you could ask them, they could say, is there anything else, like for example, do you have a house you have to sell currently, or no, we're just going to rent it out. Okay, well, that needs to be disclosed. Okay, you would have to disclose that you have to rent it out, for how much money you got to rent it out for, and that kind of.
If your pre-approval is required to have that cash, your debt to income,
Right.
to afford the mortgage.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. Number 7 is for the earnest money. And so that's where you're going to put in the amount of earnest money that the buyer is going to turn into escrow within 2 days of mutuality, right? And so that amount is another question they're going to ask you. They're going to say, how much do I have to put down for earnest money? So the answer would be, you don't have to put anything down for earnest money at all. But the problem is, you can also offer, $5 for the house, but nobody's going to take it, because earnest money, earnest means sincerity, right? Sincere. So how sincere, you're showing the seller how sincere you are in moving forward and closing. So how much money is going to be required to show that sincerity is the question you should be asking. And I can tell you that 0 would not show very much sincerity. Usually in our area, what I've seen kind of as a rule of thumb is 1%. So if it's a $700,000 house, then $7,000 earnest money. But there's no laws or limits or anything like that. You can offer more than that for earnest money if you want to show how really exuberant you are about buying a place. It's going to apply toward your purchase price. No, you're good. But it also is going to be forfeited to the seller if you walk away without legal excuse.
Hey, John, aren't you able to offer other items as earnest for earnest deposit, like a car or jewelry or something like that?
You can, yeah. It's highly unusual, but you can, sure. Sure.
Real quick question. I thought in the state of Washington, to make this contract legal, they have to have some kind of compensation, or money has to transfer hands to complete the contract.
For earnest money?
Yeah.
Well, actually, yeah, that's not, that you're talking about the consideration requirement for a valid contract. So there's
Oh, yeah.
four elements for a valid contract, one of which is consideration.
Right.
But that's not, in a home purchase, that's not the consideration. The consideration is the party's promise to purchase the property.
Oh, okay. All right. I understand it. Okay. Thank you.
But it's a great, it's a great question, because I even had a lawyer one time argue that with me, and I had to explain that to the lawyer, and then and where to reference it in the law books to find out what that was. And he was like, huh, I didn't even know that. So with a house purchase, it's the promise. It's the promise to come up with the $750,000 at closing. And that's in the promise for a promise. So the earnest money doesn't even need to be there, but what seller's going to take an offer where their sincerity, their earnestness in buying the house is zero? I don't know of any. Kelly might. So, so you would put in the amount there, and then you would check the appropriate box. Is it going to be a wire? Is it going to be a personal check? Is it going to be other? I would not use a note. Okay, so you notice I didn't say the word note, even though it's right there. I would not use a note. A note is basically, well, it's an IOU. An IOU is a piece of paper saying, hey, I'll pay you this sometime in the future. To me, that doesn't seem very earnest. As long as and it's going to be 2 days after mutuality, it's going to be due anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I would not use a note. I would avoid that at all costs. Have them pay with a check, or with have the money wired into the escrow, the earnest money wired into the escrow from their bank account, or check the box for other if it's something else. But and this is where you would Lene, you would put in that other for the title to the Mercedes-Benz or whatever it is. Then underneath that line, on the next line, it says delivery date. Without filling anything in, it's going to be 2 days. Okay, so that's what the adjoining paragraph on page 2, which is B, paragraph B on page 2, says 2 days, unless it's written in differently here. Now, if I'm the listing agent, and you put in 5 days instead of 2, and you write in 5 days, I'm going to be questioning the sincerity of your buyer, and I'm going to bring that up to my seller. And oftentimes, when sellers are making decisions on which offer to accept, it's these little things that make a big difference. But it's 2 days following mutual acceptance. So let's say we get mutual acceptance today on Wednesday. That means day 1 is tomorrow, Thursday, and day 2 is going to be Friday, right? Okay, and so by the end of the banking day on Friday, that money's got to be in the escrow. And you, as the agent, want to make sure that that's done, because if it's not done, the seller has the right to terminate the transaction. The DOL will probably investigate why the money wasn't deposited and why you weren't on top of it as the buyer's agent. So you always want to follow through, even though the buyer may be the one taking it to escrow or electronically transferring escrow. You always want to follow up with escrow and make sure they got the money when the buyer said they were sending. So that's, and then you're going to always check that last box that says closing agent, which is another term for escrow. And if you're the listing agent and an offer comes in on your listing where they've checked the box that says buyer brokerage firm, counter offer that immediately and change it to closing agent. You don't want the fox guarding the hen house. Don't let them hold the money for their own buyer. I would want it held in a separate escrow account. Paragraph B is the one that adjoins this paragraph 7. So on page 2, we have 2 paragraphs actually that fall under B. And whenever we go over pages 2 through 6 of the contract, on the far right side are the line numbers. So oftentimes as we go through this, I'll be referring to line numbers. And so I'm referring to those line numbers on the right side. So this is lines 7 through 38, basically, the 2 paragraphs under B. At the beginning of it, it says the buyer shall deliver the earnest money by the delivery date listed in specific term number 7. 2 days from mutuality if not filled in, to the party holding the earnest money, which will be escrow. If sent by mail, the earnest money must arrive at the escrow office by the delivery date. So the mailbox rule, the old mailbox rule, if you've ever heard of that, doesn't apply to this. It's not when they put it in the mail to send the earnest money. It's when the earnest money actually is at the office of the escrow. Okay, the escrow will set up, the rest of the paragraph talks about that if they are going to make a earnest money of more than $10,000, $10,001 or more, then that escrow could set up a separate account just for that buyer, and the interest accrued could go to that buyer. Otherwise, it would just go into a pooled account, and then the interest goes to the state housing fund and education fund. So at the very end of that first paragraph of B, lines 20, 21, it's basically saying that closing agent is instructed to provide a written verification of receipt of that earnest money and notice of dishonor of any check to the parties and brokers at the addresses and or fax numbers provided herein. Okay, so if the buyer's check bounces, then the seller does have the right to terminate the transaction. So what I would suggest doing if that happens, and you learn about it before the listing agent learns about it, is I would call my buyer and say, hey, get some cash down there immediately, because I have to call the listing agent and basically let that listing agent know that your check bounced. And they would have the right to terminate the transaction unless you beat them to the punch by getting the cash into the escrow. Kind of a delay tactic, yes, but it's who we represent, right? We represent the buyer in this case, so we want to give them enough time to get down there and get that cash turned in. If we're audited, I shouldn't say if, when we're audited by the state, when this COVID stuff settles out, they usually audit every real estate company every year, especially when this our size is going to get audited every year. When they do an audit, they are looking mostly at property management, which we don't do. That's why, one of the reasons why we don't do property management. But the other reason is because they're gonna look at the earnest money deposits, and they're gonna look at when they were deposited. They're gonna, and if one wasn't deposited on time, they're gonna ask why. And you can say, well, I didn't have control of it. The buyer was the one who was making the deposit. Okay, but you were their agent representing them, and why didn't you notify, did you know, let me see where you notified the seller as soon as that deposit was late. Because that's your duty. And I'm just telling you, because I'm the one that has to sit through the audits, that those auditors, they're just like badgers, you know, on this thing. They just are not going to let it go. They just jump on every little detail about that deposit and hold you responsible for it. Ultimately, me, the designated broker. So I say, well, it wasn't my fault. It was Lucas's fault. You know, he's the one that. No, I don't. I try to do my best to protect you guys, but it just helps when you've taken steps to notify the listing agent if that deposit was late. What's really bad is that they gave you the check and said you deposited, and you didn't deposit it, or it was late. Then we're really in trouble with the state. Yeah, so anyway. So the second paragraph of these two paragraphs under B says, upon termination of this agreement. So if the deal doesn't close, and then the earnest money is going to have to go to somebody, right? It's going to have to either go to the seller as a forfeiture by the buyer, or it's going to go to the buyer as a return of the earnest money to the buyer. Now, if the buyer had legal cause to get it back, then that's great. We should be fine. But if they didn't have legal cause and they didn't close because they changed their mind or whatever, then we got a problem. So I watched another video by Annie Fitzsimmons who's the legal assistance hotline for our Realtor Association in Washington State, and she was talking about earnest monies and the issues of earnest money. I was trying to see if there's anything new that I could learn or glean from it, and it's the same issues that keep coming up when they come up. And so what we have to do a better job of is when the buyer says to us, well, we got denied financing by the lender. What do? You said we could get our earnest money back. That's true. I did say that. I said we could get the earnest money back if we can provide a letter from the lender that states when the application for their loan was made, and that was made in time, states that they had sufficient money in the bank for their down payment closing costs, and third, that they had that there's a reason stated for their denial of financing. Because what the listing agent is going to ask is, I've got a pre-approval letter sitting right here in front of me. How is it they were denied financing? Right? There's a problem there. Okay, so it might end up that the seller and buyer don't agree as to what's to happen to the earnest money. The first thing as a buyer's agent that you have to do, your very first step, is when your buyer is terminating, you have to make sure that the notice of termination gets sent over to the listing agent. In this case, that would be Form 90I, which is the financing termination notice. If it was the inspections that they were terminating based on the inspections, it would be Form 35R, right? Form 35R, checking the box that they're terminating the agreement. And that's always the first thing that needs to get sent over to the listing agent. Of course, your buyer is going to be anxious to get their earnest money back, but that's the last step. The first step is to make sure notice of termination is given. Okay, then the next step after giving that notice of termination is to notify escrow that the buyer just got denied financing, or the buyer just terminated based on the inspections contingency, and that they expect their earnest money back. Okay, not that the escrow is going to give it to you, because they can't. Escrow is handcuffed themselves by a couple of RCWs that are cited right here in this paragraph. The first one is on line 25, and it's RCW 64.04. And then the other one is on line 31, and it's RCW 4.28.080. And those are basically lining out the procedures for escrow. Those are RCWs for escrow, not for us. So those RCWs for escrow and the procedure they have to go through, it basically tells them that when the real estate broker or their client, whose money is being held by you, notifies you of a termination and that they want the earnest money back, then you, escrow, have, I don't remember the days, 10 days or whatever, to send a notice out to the other side saying, hey, the buyer gave us a notice of termination and they want their earnest money back. And we're going to give it back to them unless you send us something telling us otherwise, that you think it should go to you, and with legal costs. If it becomes a stalemate, the seller says, nope, I don't think they made a good enough effort to get the financing. The buyer says, well, yeah, we did, we got denied. Seller says, well, but you had a pre-approval letter. So we got a dispute, right? So the steps escrow has to take now is escrow has to send the earnest money into the courthouse, to the interpleader. So the county courthouse has a little section that deals with earnest money disputes called interpleader. And so the interpleader court is going to hear the two sides, buyer and seller, argue their reasons why they think they should have the earnest money. And as Annie Fitzsimmons said, they will never give one side some money and one side some money. No, it's always going to be, all of it's going to go to one or the other, period. That's how the courts do it. Whoever's entitled to it is going to get the full earnest money back. So let's say that the buyer provides the proof that they got denied financing and all that stuff, and they want the earnest money back. And they have those things I talked about, that the letter from the lender that explains that they made their application in time, had sufficient money in the bank to close, and the reason for the loan denial, which was legitimate. And the seller was just mad because seller was put out because she didn't get, she turned away 3 other offers.
As an agent, to make sure your client has the money for closing, would you just use the evidence of funds form?
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd work.
Oh, sorry. Different question than that. On this subject here is we had, it was my listing, or our listing, and they kept on giving us extension after extension,
The buyer did.
the buyer. And there was a point in time where, you know, we either had to decide not to accept their extension because we needed to put it back on the market. But if we signed an extension, it just felt like we were just getting played, you know, on and on and on. Finally, I called the agent and said, you have to switch lenders or something, you know, if you can't get it done with this lender. And we were open for that, but where does it get into that point where, I mean, how do you, I mean, we start losing offers, so.
Yeah, well, you'd have to early on just either have proof of how they're gonna get that loan now, or just slam the door and say, nope, you didn't close in time, so we're done. You can have your earnest money back. You didn't get the loan, there's your earnest money. But we're not gonna sell to you. We're gonna move on to the next buyer.
But you can't make a point where you lost out on X amount of money, so we want to keep the earnest money. You can't make that.
Well, you can only if they truly had violated the terms of the contract. You know, they didn't have the money in the bank to close, or, you know, whatever it was, or they didn't make the application in time. You know, whatever it was, they would have to make that case. But when it gets disputed like this, what I wanted to say was that if it's disputed and it's going to go to the interpleader court, it's going to cost. Now, Annie Fitzsimmons just said on the video I watched this morning, it's going to cost a minimum of $2,000 just for the escrow to turn it over.
It's not even worth it. I mean,
Yeah,
at that price point that we were looking at.
yeah.
So-
I say $1,000 minimally. And it obviously could be more than that, but she says $2,000. And she says that when the interpleader court, when the parties go to the interpleader court, that she said, Annie said that the cost of the $2,000 that it costs the court, that the judge is going to require the losing party to give that to the winning party. And per paragraph P of this contract on page 4, I think it is. LMNO5 on page 5. Paragraph P says that that if this goes to interpleader court, that the one that wins gets to have their lawyer fees and legal fees paid for them by the loser. So
Wow.
if that party that was sure they were going to win hired a lawyer, now that seller who was put out has to pay all those court costs plus the lawyer fees. It could come out to be double, triple what the earnest money was, or in the case of that Spokane County case just a couple of years ago, over a $3,000 earnest money. It cost the seller
Hello?
$50,000.
Hi, are you in a meeting?
Yes.
You
Let me go.
gotta-
I was just chit chat.
Okay, thank you.
It cost the seller $50,000 in lawyer fees, plus they had to pay the court costs, plus they had to pay the other side's lawyer fees of $50,000. Cost them over $103,000, going up to $3,000. So oftentimes it's to our client's best interest that we sometimes try to work something out with the other side, right? If they feel like they've got a legitimate case, we feel like we got a legitimate case, maybe we can work something out. Now, to do that, you would want to, first of all, talk to your client and say, you know, this is what could happen. There was a Spokane County case 2 years ago where each side spent $50,000 in lawyer fees over a $3,000 earnest money. The buyer won. Seller had to pay it all. This could happen. You know, just because, you know, you and I can see that it was an injustice that we took this other offer. I'm talking like I'm the listing agent, right? Just because you and I can see that we lost out, you know, because we took this other offer and we lost out on other offers and we were financially damaged, doesn't mean that we're gonna get the earnest money because they're gonna follow the contract, literally follow the contract. If the contract says that the buyer has a contingency for financing and they can show a letter from the lender showing those three things, they get the earnest money back. That's what the contract says. And that's what happened in the Spokane County case, exactly what happened. So anyway, so we want to, kind of try to talk our seller off the ledge if they're not being realistic. But, we want to make sure that they understand we're on their side. We just don't want them to get damaged further than they've already been damaged, right?
Yeah, that's what I did. I mean,
Good.
I just said, well, let's stick with them. They're gonna finish, we're gonna ride this all the way out. I spoke to the other agent. It's because they were using assistance, state assistance to purchase the property. And that lender had never fulfilled the obligation the state was requiring.
Right.
So they had to find another lender that had experience, and they did, and we did. So we're good.
Good. Also, in that second paragraph of B, on lines 35 and 36, it says, if either party fails to authorize the release of the earnest money to the other party when required to do so under this agreement, that party shall be in breach of this agreement. So in that case that I gave in the example, the seller was in breach of contract, which enabled the buyer to sue them. And so we would want to, in representing our seller appropriately, make the seller aware of that situation. Okay, so I wanted to now go over the very last item for today, which is paragraph 8, default, on the front page. So the default, you're going to check one of two boxes, either forfeiture of earnest money or seller's election of remedies. And those two choices are explained in paragraph O of page 5, at the top of page 5, where it says that it explains the number 1 there, explains what the forfeiture of earnest money is, which is that's being treated as liquidated damages. There would be no other options available to the seller other than to get the earnest money. Number 2, the second box, if checked, is the seller's election of remedies, which explains that the seller has these options that they can sue for, which could include that earnest money. And the problem is going to be that when we're talking about earnest money, we're talking about an amount of money that is going to be exceeded by the lawyer fees probably in the first month of going after it, right? So for the seller to pursue other remedies, they're going to have to get a lawyer to do that. And already they're spending money that's going to be wasted money. If the first box is checked, it just says the earnest money is going to be forfeited as liquidated damages. It's a pretty easy thing to settle. If it does go to a court, it's going to be a pretty quick thing to settle and inexpensive. And that is what I would recommend we check in every case, as long as there's enough earnest money there that it would make the seller whole, as they say, if the buyer walked away. And I think that 1% is a good number for that. So if there's a minimally 1% earnest money and the box checked as the earnest money as a sole and exclusive remedy, I think that's the way to go. Whether you're the listing agent or the buyer's agent, that's the way to go. Any questions about that or anything that we've covered today? Okay. Well, I appreciate all of you being here, and we had a lot of good questions, and I appreciated that. And so next week, I'll be going over part 2 of this Form 21 with you, and I hope you can make it to that. See you later.
All right, thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
Good.